Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Well, happy Tuesday, everyone, and hope you've had a good week thus far. Great weekend last weekend, and hope you're doing well, you're healthy, your family's doing well. As always, just really want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. But we are very glad to be having our meeting today. So I'm going to go ahead and call our meeting to order. As all of you know, this is our September meeting of the Supporting Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Council. We have a lot to do today. We're pretty excited. I think we're going to have some very, very meaningful conversations around a couple of main portions of the agenda, which we'll talk about in a minute. But again, as always, so thankful for your time. So I'm talking first to, of course, council members. Thank you. Again, we appreciate your commitment, your willingness to really dedicate an afternoon, and then certainly as part of ongoing conversations, all the different expertise and opinions, guidance, information, resources, things that you're bringing forward. On behalf of the ACL team, thank you so very much. And of course, I also want to thank members of the public who are tuning in. It's always nice to know that we do have non-council members who are interested in hearing what's going on. And, certainly as we have done, we always welcome feedback and grateful for just the continued interest, again, of public participants who are delighted to participate. So thank you, thank you. I want to go ahead and, as we kick off, acknowledge a couple of things. First of all, as we hopefully all know, Sunday was National Grandparents' Day. And if you haven't already read the blog that Lori wrote, hi Lori, we're so glad that you wrote that blog, and I hope that all of you will take a chance to read it if you haven't already. It's titled Led by Love. And Lori does a great job of just sort of recapping, but then also calling out, as we all know, the phenomenal role that grandparents play. Really, for me, what jumped out of her blog was that statement about how grandparents give so much. And I know we all know that's the case, and certainly it does vary some family by family, but I will say that pretty consistently from my observation, grandparents are just, again, they're so committed and they're so all in their effort. And as all of you know, having been raised by my grandparents, I just reflect back and think about just, so much that both my grandfather and grandmother did for me that was just above and beyond. And I know for so many of us, that's a big part of our calling and big part of why we are so passionate about doing the work that we do. And I have to tell you real quick, I also find this interesting, as we can all appreciate, anytime mainstream media or anytime greater exposure is created around this issue, then I think that's a positive thing. So there's a television show called Chrisley Knows Best, and I know some of you watch it, so don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. I will tell you that my wife is a regular watcher, and I'm doing more manly things when it's on, just so you know, but it's in the background, so I do pay attention occasionally. And what I thought has been interesting in this season, if you know what I'm getting ready to tell you, is Todd Chrisley, the star of the show, and his wife, they're actually raising a grandchild. And, you're talking about a show that started off and that wasn't in the dynamic, but, a multimillionaire and a guy that really has life together, and then now raising a grandchild, beautiful little girl. And it was interesting, in a recent episode, they had a tea party. And of course, he, wasn't really familiar with having tea parties, but he did a great job. And it just reminded me, it caused me to just momentarily reflect on some of the things that, my grandparents did for me. And I'll tell you, the first example that comes to mind was a tree house that my grandfather built. And he wasn't a really good architect, and thinking back, praise God, I'm still alive. But it was just so wonderful, though, to have him engaged and excited. We built this treehouse together. His mobility was limited, but he always managed to climb up that tree and get in that treehouse and sit in there for as long as we needed to talk and just have a good time. So, those stories, again, just reinforce for me why it's just an honor to do what we do. So let's get down to business. I know that all of you are aware of the resource guide that our team recently put out specifically for grandparents raising grandchildren during COVID. One of many, many valuable tools, this one specifically directed at grandparents. And, it is a unique time. It's an unprecedented time. So as your federal partner, of course, we're interested in doing what we can to help those grandparents. And of course, I would ask all of you, not that this is a tall ask by any means, but I would just ask all of you to really be sure that beyond this role, you take every advantage you can to be an advocate or a resource champion Probably like you, I am regularly asked. I even got a text last night from my brother-in-law. A lady he works with needed some help. So we all have to be ready to go to kind of help support individuals in need. And really one of the best resources for all of you, I'm going to point you to our website, acl.gov. What an excellent resource. We have a special page dedicated to COVID, but then also beyond. So again, I would just ask that all of you, please be ready to lean in that regard. We also know that September is Kinship Care Month. So of course it's very fitting that we're having this meeting today, and certainly continues to drive home the important conversation. And really I'm proud of the work we've done over the past year. I don't know about you, but this year has just flown by. Last 6 months, of course, has been a blur for all of us, but just really proud of the work we've done, your incredible commitment and your dedication to the issues. So thank you. Now, I'm also very excited to tell you that it's not just me saying thank you today, but we actually have the Health Secretary for the United States getting ready to tell you thank you. As Greg knows, we worked hard to ask our boss, Secretary Azar, if he'd be willing to do a little video to express his appreciation for your work. And you can see now on your screen it's queued up. So we'll go ahead and play that, and then I'll jump back in with some closing remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm grateful for the opportunity to thank the Advisory Council to support grandparents raising grandchildren as you gather for the third time. And I'm honored to welcome everyone participating in today's meeting. When the Council convened for the first time in Washington just over 1 year ago, it was the start of a historic effort to improve the lives of our country's 2.7 million grandparent and kinship-headed households. We know that kinship families come together for many reasons, whether because of parental illness, military deployment, substance use disorders, or incarceration. Grandparents and kinship caregivers who step in to provide care for children are among a larger group of individuals we collectively call family caregivers. These caregivers provide the sense of stability, permanency, and belonging that our youth need at critical points in their lives. At the same time, these caregivers face legal and financial uncertainties and often must make choices and decisions quickly and in the absence of critical information and supports. As Secretary of HHS, I know that family caregivers and kinship families are central to our mission of improving the health and well-being of all Americans. They are national assets we must all cherish, and they deserve the best we have to offer in terms of support, recognition, and understanding. The Supporting Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Act was signed into law to achieve that goal, and this Advisory Council is charged with making that goal a reality. The Advisory Council's vision statement, which was adopted earlier this year, speaks clearly to your commitment. It bears repeating here. Identifying, promoting, coordinating, and disseminating to the public information, resources, and the best practices available to help grandparents and other older relatives both meet the needs of the children in their care and maintain their own physical and mental health and emotional well-being. In addition to laying out a vision and mission focused on bringing together critical information and resources to support grandparent and kinship families, you've taken extra measures to ensure the availability of critical resources during emergency situations like the current pandemic. Every member of the Advisory Council brings a unique and critical perspective to the work at hand. You've been there on the front lines, consulting with teachers, healthcare professionals, social workers, lawyers, and others to advocate for children. The experiences and expertise each of you possesses, both personally and professionally, are key to ensuring that we fulfill Congress's expectations for the Act and, more importantly, improve the lives of grandparents and kinship families, especially the children they include. I look forward to reviewing your report and submitting it to Congress, and I look forward to ensuring your work is widely read and implemented so that we can assist grandparents and kinship families in every way possible. My hope is that within the pages of our initial report to Congress, the voices of families are presented in a clear and compelling way. Today, as you consider the recommendations you'll be making in your report, I'm confident you will help all of us achieve a robust and clear vision for better supporting grandparent and kinship families. So thank you to every member of the Advisory Council for all your hard work and dedication over the past year. You will help all kinship families flourish and as a result help our country flourish too. Thank you, and I wish you a productive rest of the meeting today.
All right, very good. Wasn't that special? That's pretty cool, guys. I got to tell you. So, as you likely know, as an assistant secretary, that's my boss. I report to the secretary. It's my honor to be with him often. I was with him, as an example, 3 times yesterday. And during one of the meetings, I had a chance to just quickly update him on the work of this council and remind him that, of course, the video was something we were going to play today. And, he is just so genuinely interested in what we're doing. So I'll tell you right up front, the report we're writing, he's going to read it. So you're talking about, again, the Cabinet Secretary for Health for the United States government is going to read the report we're doing, which putting together, which I think is so exciting. He's going to certainly offer some feedback, offer his support. And again, I think that's pretty remarkable that we can count on that. And again, I'm just going to be honest, you're talking about a guy that runs a $1.4 trillion federal agency. So it means a lot that while he's the tip of the spear for the COVID response and involved in so many other things, he's right there with us. So again, that was special. And again, his remarks are genuine. So thank you. I thank you. He thanks you. And, again, I know that for today's meeting, we have a lot we're going to talk about. We're going to do the analysis of the RFI, and that's going to be interesting. And then also an analysis that we're going to pull together of that for the initial report to Congress that we'll be sure to include. And then also we're going to have a final consensus discussion, which will be so critical on a set of recommendations that we want to include in that initial report. So a lot to do today. Again, on behalf of the Administration for Community Living, thank you so much. Grateful for your time and your willingness to really lean in. So with that, I'm done, but I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl, who's going to do a roll call. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you and good afternoon. And we'll start with Administrator Lance Robertson, who we just heard from.
Present.
Thank you. And then we'll move to co-chairs, Jaya Lent.
Present.
Thank you. And Dr. Ethelyn McQueen Gibson is unable to participate this afternoon. And we'll go to our non-federal members, Martha Crowther.
Present.
Thank you. Patrick Donovan.
Present, thank you.
Gail Engel.
Present.
Sarah Hedden. Bet Hoxie.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Tony Cleckley. Yvonne Lee.
Present.
Thank you. Linda Miller.
Present.
Sharon Olson.
Present.
Sarah Smalls.
Present.
Charlotte Stevenson.
Present.
Thank you. And then for our federal members, Sonia Begay.
Present.
Taffy Campaign. Deborah Cox Roush.
Present.
Linda Davis, or alternate, Christine Myrna.
Cheryl, this is Lori. Linda Davis is present. She needs to be moved to the attend.
Thank you.
Christine is also here.
Thank you, Christine. Liliana Hernandez. Deborah Royster for Michael Herndon.
Present.
Thank you. Amelia Carricker.
Present.
Helen Lamont. And Lisa McGuire, I believe, is unable to attend today. Dr. Melinda Baldwin. Tamara Mays. Catherine O'Callahan. Tammy Proctor, Carmen Sanchez is unable to participate today. Mark Vafiades,
Yes, hi, I'm here.
thank you. Joan Weiss, Beverly Yang, okay, thank you very much. And I will pass it on to Lori Stahlbaum. Lori?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori Stahlbaum. I'm the alternate designated federal official for the Advisory Council for Grandparents Raising Grandchildren. I'm going to give you a little background on what to expect during our meeting this afternoon based on the agenda, which will be coming up on your screen right now. But before I get started talking about the agenda, there are a few housekeeping items that I'd like to share. Council members, the meeting is being recorded, so please do not use the chat function when providing input. Please turn on your video and microphone when speaking. And then please mute your phones when you're not speaking. The chat function is available for members of the public to provide input. Members of the public are in listen-only mode, so if you wish to communicate with us during the meeting, please use the chat feature. Also, we do have one of our staff, Clay Adiel, monitoring the chat throughout the meeting. If a response is required or important. And plus, everything that's entered into the chat box during this meeting is saved and reviewed after the meeting. So your chat and comments are not lost. If we do use polls, which we may or may not, we have a couple queued up if we need them. They're for council members only, non-federal council members only. If you need to use or would like to use closed captioning, there should be a CC box on the bottom of your screen. On my screen, it says CC with closed caption underneath. Click on that and that'll turn on the closed captioning for you. And finally, please note, due to the limited amount of time we have and the tremendous amount of work we're going to try to accomplish today, we didn't schedule any breaks. So council members, everyone, please feel free to step away whenever you need to for whatever reason. So now on to the agenda. So while the agenda for the rest of the day really only has 2 things on it, I know there's 3, but 2 main things on it. Don't be deceived. This is going to be a very informative and interactive meeting. During our first presentation, the SGRG request for information, or RFI, analysis findings, Wilma Brockington Parker is going to give you some very detailed statistics, recurring themes, and some samples of just a few of the comments we received in response to your request for information that was from the public that was put out earlier this year. During the second session of the agenda, during the second session of the agenda, the report to Congress recommendations discussion, Greg Link and I will lead you through a facilitated discussion of the 21 recommendations which we've listed under 5 priority areas. These were all provided to the council members prior to the meeting, so hopefully we'll have a great discussion and get some good feedback and finalize these recommendations this afternoon. The recommendations we will discuss and finalize today were compiled from all our great discussions in last month's subcommittee meetings. And so when we're discussing, make sure, if there's wordsmithing or if we miss something or if there's a recommendation missing, we'll be looking to the council to help us with fill in any blanks. And I do hope everyone found the guide useful. So before Wilma starts her presentation, Sarah Markell and Greg Link have a few updates for everyone. Sarah?
Hi, thank you, Lori. Hello, everyone. It is so wonderful to be with you here today. We are moving right along with the report to Congress. The recommendations you're working on today are a key part of that report, and the RFI analysis is going to inform our outlining of the challenges faced by kinship families and grandfamilies, One of the things we're having conversations about as we're working is making sure that we accurately reflect the complexity of this space, while at the same time writing in a way that people who aren't immersed in it can quickly understand the challenges you all face. And so we're putting a lot of heart and energy into this work, and we're excited to have a document for you to review in the near future. Greg?
Greg, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Technology these days. I just want to extend my welcome and thank you also to the members of the Advisory Council as well as to the public who are tuned in. I don't have much else to add beyond what Lori and Sarah have told you about, but I just wanted to let all of the members of the Advisory Council know that all of the great work you are doing is happening right alongside the work of the Family Caregiving Advisory Council. As we'd shared with you during the subcommittee meetings last month, the recommendations that you all will be looking at and finalizing today will lay the groundwork for a set of concrete actions and steps in support of grandparent and kinship caregivers that can be included in the National Caregiving Strategy that will be developed later on down the road by the Family Caregiving Advisory Council. Because there will only be one national caregiving strategy, we want to be sure that the needs of grandparent and kinship caregivers are reflected in it, since they are an integral component of the overall caregiving population. In the very short term, probably meaning in the next 2 to 3 months, Lori and I and the rest of the ACL team are planning to have the Grandparent Advisory Council begin fleshing out short narrative statements for each of the recommendations we reach consensus on today. And I'll have some more information about that for you before the end of today's meeting. We'll provide you with a framework for that task, and we view this as an opportunity for the council members to take a much more active role in bringing the initial report to completion in the coming months. We will also are going to have you start working through the list of programs and materials that were submitted to ACL as part of the RFI that you're going to be hearing about in just a minute. In particular, the programs and resources we gathered need to be looked at for inclusion in the report that we're working on. The list of programs and resources will serve as our starting point for an ongoing gathering of new and model practices that can support grandparent and kinship families. But before we can do that, we first want to hear from Wilma Brockington Parker, who has spent the last several weeks reviewing and analyzing the 300+ submissions we received in response to the RFI that was fielded earlier this year. Wilma really dove into the information that was submitted, and I think you'll agree we heard a lot of really wonderful things and got great ideas for specific action steps the council could consider moving forward later in our work. So Wilma, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Greg, and good day, everyone. I have the honor of presenting the request for information analysis findings. This segment of the presentation will include the purpose and outcomes of the request for the RFI, an overview of the responses, primary issues and themes, some areas of concern from the respondents, as well as their recommendations. To give you a good point of reference, responses were collected from December 9th, 2019 through January 31st, 2020. So went a little bit too far. Let me go back a little bit. Okay, so I want to start off with the purpose and the outcomes of the RFI. So what we were looking at was to identify issues and trends facing grand and kinship families from various sources. And these included, but are not limited to, public and private stakeholders and entities, tribal organizations, and individuals and families impacted by the opioid crisis. In addition, we wanted to also identify some key takeaways to be included in the initial report to Congress as required by the Supporting Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Act of 2018. Additionally, as far as purpose and outcomes, we wanted to provide some recommendations. You'll see hear about a lot of the recommendations that were provided from the respondents, as well as resources to support grand and kinship families. Also, we wanted to provide a framework for the Advisory Council to manage and take meaningful actions and activities to support grand and kinship families, as well as other caregivers. One of the main things is to really focus on the solutions, and really the more that we can focus on and deliver solutions, we certainly have the opportunity to make a positive difference in the lives of children, their grandparents, kinship caregivers, as well as other caregivers. I also wanted to, before I really dig into the findings, give a big thanks. So a few acknowledgements. Certainly want to thank the respondents to the request for information who took some time to really review and provide their recommendations as well as their experiences. So I'm going to share a portion of that as well. And also want to acknowledge and thank the Advisory Council. I want to give out a special thanks to Dr. Amelia Carricker, Beverly Yang, Carmen Sanchez, Charlotte Stevenson, Gail Engel, Michael Herndon, and Sonia Begay for their, additionally for their time and input for the request for information. In reference to the information that was reviewed, as well as the report, wanted to point out some limitations before I go into some of the details. So with that, just a few points here. There is limited demographic data. We didn't specifically ask for that as a part of the RFI, so I won't be able to tell you some questions that you may have or answer some questions that you may have in reference to the ages of the respondents. If they were in a rural area or in a major city, or even if they rented or they had a mortgage. So I wouldn't be able to give you that information in reference to that. So our focus is really going to be on the responses. Also, another limitation is, you know, again, the time period that we collected the responses was early December through January 31st. And all of us know that was actually pre-COVID. So we don't know if any of the responses would be any different. So just wanted to mention that as another limitation. Also, through the respondents, several use acronyms for organizations, as well as some benefits and some of the recommendations. In a review process, some of them were a little bit challenging to identify. So that's going to be another limitation of some of this data. And also in some cases, there was no specific breakdown to identify the type of respondent. So I thought it was important to at least put this information up front in reference to some of the limitations. So now we're going to transition to the RFI responses. Okay. So there were a total of 9 response categories, and we had 307 respondents. From the 307 respondents, we received just over 1,900 individual responses, 1,908 to be exact. And respondents were asked to provide recommendations for each response category. In some instances, many respondents provided responses to all 9 categories. And in other instances, they provided a response to a portion thereof. So they didn't necessarily answer all 9 categories. Okay, so I'll go through these and point out some things, and then we'll get into even more detail. Okay, so the first category was meet the mental, physical, health, educational, and nutritional needs of those for whom they provide care. So we had 254 individual responses representing 13.3%. Address other concerns such as legal assistance, financial support, and affordable housing associated with this population of caregivers and care recipients. We received 242 responses representing 12.7%. The next category, maintain their own physical and mental health and emotional and financial well-being. We had 230 responses representing 12%. The next category, grand families, kinship families affected by the opioid epidemic or other substance misuse. And this could include issues experienced by children who were exposed prenatally to alcohol or drugs, as well as family issues associated with substance abuse. So it came in at 204 at 11%. Native American tribes, 90 responses representing about 5%. Grandparents and other older relatives who are raising or supporting grandchildren, coming in at 268 responses, representing 14%. And moving on to the additional categories, showing a continuation. The next response category was children in the care of a grandparent or older relative, 196 responses representing about 10%. And we have a question in reference to the responses, and that was, do you think additional federal legislation is needed to better support and serve grandparents and older relatives raising children? And we asked them to describe. So we came in at 250 responses, 13%. And then finally, we asked respondents to share any additional recommendations they may have for supporting grandparents and older relatives caring for children. 174 responses representing 9%. So again, we had a total of 1,908 responses. So this next slide is in reference to the respondents themselves. So based on the comments, able to go through and identify grandparents. So we had a great response from grandparents in that we had 146 responses. So that was nearly 50% who were grandparents. So that represented 47.56%. Okay. The next largest percentage came from community organizations and government agencies at 96 respondents representing 31.27%. We had a category of unidentified. They came in at 53, representing 17.26%. Kinship caregivers, 1.3%, coming in at 5. There were 3 individuals who identified themselves as attorneys, attorney advocates, I'd say, and they represented 0.9, so just under 1%. Non-relative caregivers, equally 3 at 98%, and then, 0.98%, and then foster caregivers, 1 person representing 0.33. Okay, so you see here there are a variety of respondents within the 307 respondents. Okay, let's now take a look at some of the themes and issues as outlined by the respondents. Okay, so in looking at the data that was received, there were certainly some issues surrounding health, safety, and what is best for the children. And I will tell you, in reading many of the comments and recommendations, I could certainly feel that by reading those. So I have to admit, at some point, it was very emotional for me as the person analyzing the data, certainly. Also, another thing or issues or themes that came up was that particularly those who were caregivers, they expressed that they were really unprepared for the financial pressures and the consequences that go along with the issue. So that came across in comments regarding housing, legal, medical, employment opportunities or lack thereof, and also childcare. So those are just a few of the examples. Certainly, also through their words, they talked about managing the physical and mental health issues that they are faced with every day. So that was for the caregivers as well as the children. In addition, there were several comments in reference to being the quote unquote gatekeeper. So between the biological parents as well as the children, and the struggle with that, and some of the things that they had been experiencing were very poignant in the explanation. Okay. Also, to continue, not having appropriate, affordable, and or supportive advocacy that came across, as well as really in looking at the information, many of the issues I'd say are very multifaceted, variable, and intertwined. Okay, so particularly if it was financial, that naturally impacts a lot of activities and support. And then another thing that certainly came across from the comments from the respondents is some didn't know what they didn't know. So they had no source of reference or idea about available resources, available advocacy, as well as financial support. Okay. Next, we're going to move forward with some areas of concern. So you'll see some statistics here as well. So when analyzing the areas of concern, I reviewed the frequency of responses to target specific concerns. So identify the issues and outline some of the examples as presented by the respondents. Okay. So the top issue that came out as far as a concern was finances. So examples of this were, some of the respondents were certainly on fixed income. They had additional expenses that they weren't prepared for, insurance costs, and maybe unable to work. So that certainly impacted finances. So the frequency of that was 581, representing 20.91, so almost 21% in reference to that. And just as a point of reference, the total responses came to 2,778 individual responses. Okay. Another issue was in reference to legislation and laws, and examples they came across were that, many of the respondents said that the laws appear to be more favorable to the biological parents. And also, if they were going to different areas or relocating, the child benefits weren't transferable, and they had to really start the process over again. Okay. Another issue that came in was legal assistance. So respondents talked about the high cost. They talked about the expenses associated with the adoption process and also accessibility. That came in at 271, and so the percentages came just below 10%. Another area of concern, schools, education, and the examples that were provided were in reference to special needs not adequately addressed. So some children had special needs in those instances. And then another issue that cropped up was they felt that there was a lack of school system support. So that came in also just below 10% with a frequency of 266. Okay. Another issue, addictions, the cycle of drug use by biological parents, resources for biological parents, and also the impact on children. So there were a lot of certainly comments in reference to the emotional pieces that go along with that. Okay. Certainly another important issue is housing. So there were certainly comments about, the affordability of housing. And some of the respondents had limited space, and also the maintenance of housing. And in some communities where there are adult or 55+ communities, children are not accepted. So that represented another issue where they had to move or relocate. And also another issue that came up was in reference to housing was custody orders will prevent relocation. Okay. Additional areas of concern were food and nutrition, cost, nutritional value of foods. Some respondents had children, or they themselves had special diets, and that came in 213. With representing just over 7.5% as far as percentages. Another issue was childcare and the high cost of childcare. Just below that was respite care. So here respondents talked about affordability, the affordability aspect, the availability, as well as the quality of respite care. That came in at 5.62%. Physical health, in reference to that, that was disabilities that some caregivers as well as the children were dealing with. So that came in just above 5%. Another thing that stuck out or was mentioned was in reference to mental and emotional health. So that revolved around stress, loss of social relationship, particularly with the caregivers who were had retired, and they wanted to, they had opportunities to socialize with their retired friends or older friends, and the impact of some of that socialization. They also talked about child trauma, particularly between the biological parents and the impact of that trauma on the children. Also, they talked about separation, lack of support, as well as grief. So there were 105 responses in reference to that as far as frequency, equaling 3.78%. Okay. And also medical and health. So in many of the comments, I noticed that caregivers, they certainly, in many cases, placed their health after the children. And also there was noted certainly a lack of self-care and also having to manage the children's medical issues on top of their own. So that came in at 101 and about 3.5 or 3.64%, totaling 100%. And again, that was 2,778 respondents. Okay. So now I'm going to transition next to some roadblocks to obtaining support. So these are a few of the comments or references in reference to really what's in the way. What are some of the roadblocks that were pointed out from the respondents? I certainly did notice that in some areas there are age limitations for support. For example, some benefits or some support systems were only available to the 60+ population. So as many of us know, grandparents can be younger. They can be in their 30s, they can be in their 40s, they can be in their 50s. So that threshold of 60+ represented a roadblock for some of the grandparents, as well as other caregivers. Statute limitations not correlating with federal law, giving caregivers the right to be heard in hearings concerning children, a lack of compliance with federal laws. Also another roadblock is challenging or difficult for caregivers to comply with licensing requirements for foster families. So that represented some additional rules and hurdles. Also, lack of food stamps, child-only public assistance, Medicaid, school breakfast and lunch. Additional roadblocks, if custody is not relinquished to the state, there was no support or benefits and services. So certainly another roadblock. Another one that came up certainly was affordability. So special needs childcare was certainly an issue. In addition to inconsistencies, they can vary by location. So different jurisdictions have different rules or guidelines or regulations. And there was one that stood out in reference to long wait periods. So there was a respondent that indicated that they had a wait of 7 years for some support. Additional roadblocks, lack of or challenging to find information about available resources. So this goes back, and I just want to reiterate, some individuals, they didn't know what they didn't know. So of course that was in reference to resources, advocacy, financial support. Okay. There was also there were some instances of a lapse in medical coverage. So there were delays and particularly in getting counseling that was needed sooner rather than later. Some also expressed not feeling advocated for by state agencies. So in some instances, they did say that they felt alone or not supported. Okay, and then there were a few comments in reference to lack of knowledge about really raising the new generation. Okay. I want to share with you some financial concerns, and these are actual respondent quotes here. So I'll read a couple. I pulled out a couple, and these are again in reference to financial concerns. So quote, "I don't qualify for any support, but I need assistance and guidance to create a job that would allow me to make money and be able to make my own schedule and take care of the child. I believe I'm capable of doing it. However, I need financial support," end quote. Here's another quote, I've done research to try to get financial assistance and I got nowhere. They also told me we don't qualify for food stamps, which I don't understand because I'm taking care of my grandson and I'm disabled and my husband is 63 and disabled. Here's another quote, "I am desperate for help. I receive $271 for TANF and 308 food assistance each month. That's it. I have 2 chronic and at times debilitating autoimmune disorders that limit my earning potential greatly, not to mention issues with affordable childcare and available hours applicable to my job hours. It feels as though which affects their quality of life too, am being punished for my decision to do the right thing," end quote. Here's a couple more. Well, quote, "Well, retirement is pretty much out of the window and who knows whether or not Social Security is going to be there anymore if we ever do get a chance to retire someday," end quote. And then finally, quote, "We are the new poor. I give up medications to have money to take care of my 2 granddaughters." Okay, so very poignant responses. Okay. So let's review some recommendations that came from the respondents regarding financial concerns. Okay, and these are just a few. One recommendation is to increase knowledge of available resources from state, federal, and community-based organizations. Also, provide some resources for adoption. Another is to partner with community-based organizations and utility companies. And this could be for grants, for scholarships, home repairs, energy assistance, etc. And also, many state agencies, they have workforce development agencies. So to partner with workforce development for job training. Okay. A few additional recommendations. Connect with pro bono attorneys and legal clinics. Many of the law schools do have legal clinics, and there are pro bono attorneys out there who could also lend a helping hand. Okay. Another idea, community-wise, is to connect with churches as well as food pantries. Also provide training for advocates to better support impacted caregivers. So really that's expanding knowledge base for those who are in those supportive and helping professions. And also some webinars and teleconferences. So topics could include on financial literacy and money management, will planning, and as well as estates, navigating through some support resources, and also technology one-on-one. So this would be some access in reference to resources. Okay. So next, let's move on to mental and physical concerns, and I wanted to share a few quotes with you from the respondents. Quote, "Unfortunately, grandparents put themselves last as far as taking care of their overall health and financial well-being. More needs to be done in the area of respite care services for grandparents raising grandchildren," end quote. Next quote, "It's hard to take on grandchildren at our age. We cannot retire or take a break. If so, who or how are these kids going to survive?" end quote. Then also, quote, the children that were exposed to drugs are growing up with medical and educational issues. Okay. And here's another one, and I'm going to try to get through this one. Every time I read this, I get emotional about it. Quote, if you could have seen his little face when she had him in the car screaming at us, you're never seeing him again. He was crying, screaming, kicking, and banging his little head to get out of that car seat to get to us. You would have thought I was his mom. He's 20-something now and has lots of depression, and I still can't get over the mental abuse he went through. He's not doing so well, but he's a good person. Plus now we try to help him when he needs something. Okay. So we're going to move on to some recommendations to improve mental and physical well-being. Here's a opportunity to locate opportunities for individuals as well as group therapy. So that could be through schools, organizations, as well as private groups. Also connect with existing support groups and what I like to call solutions groups. So support groups, individuals can relate to some of the same issues, and also in that groups, certainly it could be an opportunity to provide some solutions to help people move forward. Okay. Excuse me. Also, connect with community and health organizations specializing in support, including substance abuse. Also provide some additional training as well as support to teachers, social workers, and other advocates about mental and health conditions to help them identify as well as refer. And also some potential webinars could be in reference to stress management, coping with in the new world that we're living in, parenting for the new generation, making healthy life choices, suicide, alcohol, and drug prevention, as well as exercise classes such as Zumba and Tai Chi. Okay, so that's just a few of the potential webinars as well as teleconferences. Okay. Let's move on to a few quotes from respondents in their own words in reference to some housing concerns. So, quote, there is no public housing assistance in my county. I can't move because of the custody orders, end quote. Also, quote, as we age, it's getting more difficult to take care of tasks such as lawn care, home repairs, etc. Senior housing doesn't allow for grandkids to live with the grandparents on a long-term or permanent basis, end quote. Here's another. Quote, some of our members have needed to move into larger homes to be able to take in the relatives, and this creates a financial burden since affordable housing is hard to find that takes in multi-generational families, end quote. Okay. And also here's another in reference to housing. Financial assistance for needy families should be available to all grandparents raising grandkids. Affordable housing somehow, we have no Section 8 housing per se. We have one complex with reduced rent, but at my low income on Social Security, I can't meet their requirement for ratio of income to rent. I have to make more money, and that would take me out of income-based apartments, end quote. Okay. So here are a few housing recommendations from our respondents. Partner with community-based organizations as well as private industry, and that could include, here are a few examples, Habitat for Humanity, local businesses with philanthropic values. Okay. Also, another recommendation was to advocate for housing communities, specifically for kinship families, grandfamilies, as well as other caregivers. Okay. Also, provide some information. This would be from utility companies for grants and subsidies. This could be in reference certainly to fuel funds, water consumption subsidies. Okay. Here's another recommendation, partner with home buyer advocacy programs, as well as present webinars and teleconferences. And these topics could include how-to clinics This could be on basic home repair, also information about federal housing programs, as well as community housing programs. Okay. Also, I'm going to present a few items from In Their Own Words, and this came in reference to Native American tribal concerns. Quote, it's impossible trying to get anything done if one of the bio parents is part of a Native American tribe. Attorney General wouldn't follow through with child support, end quote. Another quote, quote, organizations need to be better, to become more educated on the norms of many tribes in order to better assist Native Americans, end quote. And here's another quote, in Arizona, there are 22 Native American tribes. We are working toward providing consistency of grandparent services amongst the tribal entities. Okay. And here's one more, quote, as a social worker assisting families, grandparents that have become the placement of children taken into care and control of a tribal court, I found it's very difficult for some grandparents to get financial assistance, TANF, and Medicaid for the children in question. This needs to be simplified at a higher level so that each state and local counties don't hinder this group from accessing much needed resources to take care of these children, end quote. Okay. So here are a few recommendations. Educate advocates, social workers, and others about nuances and norms related to the Native American tribal community. Also, maintain family unity to reduce risk for suicide, incarceration, and certainly consider health and safety. Encourage consistency for support among tribal communities. Another recommendation, create and enhance collaborative partnerships between tribal, state, and private agencies in an effort to improve services in tribal communities. And also provide resources for suicide, drug, and alcohol prevention. A few more recommendations, more support services that could include things such as after-school care and also skill education. Also advocate for placing children in Native homes, and also advocate for an easier process for resources. Examples were given for TANF and Medicaid, and also encourage participation with established programs. Okay. On the question, the RFI question, do you think additional federal legislation is needed to better support and serve grandparents and older relatives raising children? Overwhelmingly, the vast majority indicated there was a need for federal legislation, coming in at nearly 80%, so 77.52%. 9 individuals said no, coming at 2.93%. No response for 60, and that came in at 19.54%. Okay, so here are a few quotes in their own words regarding legislative and also concerns regarding the law. So here's a quote, quote, I've spent well over $50,000 in legal fees to keep my granddaughter safe from a broken juvenile system that only promotes reunification, end quote. Another quote, quote, additional federal legislation is needed, and it needs to be uniform across the nation. Depending on which state you are in determines how the caregiver and the child is treated as far as finances. If a child is in need of a safe and stable home, then there should be one plan or guideline no matter where you live. I think the caregiver should have some representation on behalf of the caregiver. Currently, caregivers have no voice. Here's another quote regarding legislative concerns. Quote, we need laws updated addressing this crisis. We need timeframes for parents to step up or out of these children's lives and stop emotionally destroying them. We need legal assistance. Laws need to be changed and followed. In my case, I had 2 years abandonment, and the bio mom was basically forced to see her child by the judge. Parents in and out of jail and prison, positive drug tests, mental, emotional abuse to the child, none of that mattered. System is more than broken. Here are some recommendations from our respondents in reference to legislation. Partner to create legislative caucuses in every state to mobilize legislative support for caregivers. Another is to partner with existing organizations for additional studies. Okay? Also, increase funding for support at the federal level. And tied to that, certainly a recommendation came across is create some targeted tax breaks for caregivers. Another, update Social Security laws to include additional dependents and also require biological parents to pay child support. Okay. A few more recommendations from the legislative front. Advocate for same rights as adoptive parents. There's certainly some differences there. Currently, partner with law schools for legal assistance. As I mentioned, many of the law schools have clinics that are no charge. Strengthen grandparent visitation rights laws, in addition to encouraging mediation for kinship caregivers with families that are in conflict. Okay. Another one, advocate for financial support to follow the child, extend existing laws to include grand and kinship families as well as other caregivers, and also the suggestion of webinars and teleconferences, and some suggestions included grand and kinship and other caregiver rights, as well as navigating resources. Okay. Moving on to some additional recommendations. As you can see, we have received a tremendous amount of recommendations. Here are some general recommendations, and they came across as create a one-stop shop for resources. Many times caregivers have to go to different resources or different segments to get what they need. So there could be a creation of a one-stop shop. That could also include a toll-free resource or a hotline, or calling 211 for certain areas. Also, perhaps creating a database to include some vetted resources on a website. So that would be essentially a repository. Also, another recommendation, learn and harness some best practices and some strategies from community-based organizations and state agencies. So there were many, many examples from the analysis that talked about the kinship navigator programs as well as kinship councils. Okay. Here are a few more. Pilot some strategies. So you can essentially start small and see what works, see what doesn't work. And from that, expand and roll out based on the success rate and feedback from the targeted populations. Okay. Also, partner with community-based organizations to sponsor resource fairs and online summits. This could be through a lot of the low-cost, no-cost support systems that could include local libraries, churches, as well as colleges and universities as examples. And another thing is to encourage use of existing resources. So this is where you build upon what's already established versus creating something new. And that could potentially involve some enhanced funding. Also, some additional support systems. Apps are very popular. So there could be an opportunity to develop an app for one-stop shop for different resources. Another suggestion is in reference to no-cost computers and tablets from private industry. So there are many organizations that are restructuring due to COVID right now. So there is a surplus of computers and tablets. So that could certainly represent an opportunity as a recommendation. And also develop a list of presenters who can provide solutions as well as present timely topics to a variety of impacted caregivers as well as advocates. In addition, finally, post tips and strategies, and they could be posted on social media as well as YouTube. So from that, the respondents overwhelmingly provided a number of recommended resources. So to date, we've collected so far 337. And as we look at a breakdown of that information, we're looking at 201 programs, 78 publication suggestions, 39 research articles, 13 books, as well as 6 videos. Okay. So that was my last slide. And I'll open it up if we can for a few questions. I'll turn it back over to Greg.
Thank you so much, Wilma, for that incredible analysis of the RFI that we fielded late last year, early this year. Council members, did you have specific questions that you wanted to ask of Wilma while we have her with us?
Put it in the chat. This is Martha Crawford, and I wanted to say it out loud to everyone, that you did a fantastic job summarizing a tremendous amount of information. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, Dr. Crawford.
This is Gail Engel. I participated in trying to disseminate some of this information. It was overwhelming. There was no way I could have done this without a group of people doing it. So Wilma, for you to do this is incredible, and you did a fantastic job. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Ms. Engel, and I appreciate you as well as the other council members who put your thoughts in. So I was able to refer to some of that information to help with the information, and it still takes a village. So I appreciate your support, and especially the support from the council.
Good afternoon. This is Sonia Begay. I want to applaud you, Wilma, and like Gail had said, it was an overwhelming amount of responses. I think initially just having these types of responses, and they were not just focused on just one area. They basically came from all different types of avenues. And so for you to put this in such a concise area for all of us to understand and to put it in this particular database, it was very, very much applauded to you. Thank you very much. And like I said, it was amazing what you did with it. I'm like really impressed. So thank you very much for your time and your tireless effort and work for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Begay.
Hi, this is Sarah. I want to echo what everyone else has said. That was wonderful, Wilma. Very easy to follow and a lot.
Thank you, Ms. Hoxie.
Hello, this is Sarah Smalls, and I want to repeat all of the echoes and thank you for your genuine support for grandparents. And I'd like to know if we are able to access the information that, or when will we be able to access the information that you gave us?
Okay. I may turn that over to Greg and Lori to answer that question.
Sure,
Okay.
that's actually a perfect segue, so thank you. We have a little bit more work to do with the information that Wilma shared with you. We are going to, number one, Wilma, shortly after this, will begin working on a written report that will take this out of PowerPoints and put it into a narrative that we can publish and disseminate on just the findings of this RFI. The next step is we are also, as Sarah Markel had alluded to earlier, is working on crafting the report based on the outline that you all vetted and approved several months ago. Much of this information that was collected and analyzed in this RFI will go into highlighting the current challenges and needs of kinship and grand families. So we're using this information in all different ways. The recommendations that were pulled out are actually very, very specific action steps that could be taken. And so we're going to hold all of those recommendations that Wilma pulled out our discussion a little bit later on the broader recommendations will serve as sort of the broad umbrella for all of those, for many of those very specific recommendations that so many of the respondents made for specific programs or actions or training or curriculum, particular services and interventions. So that is all going to serve, you know, as the basis for your Council's contribution to specific actions on the National Caregiving Strategy. And finally, that last slide where we, Wilma broke down very quickly the number of programs that we collected and videos and books and things of that nature. You all are going to be, I'm going to get to that a little bit later. That's going to be your next assignment as a council, one of your next assignments is to begin culling through how we've organized that and beginning to make some judgments about what programs and resources get included in the initial report. But we don't want to overwhelm you all too much all at once. So yes, there will be a ton of opportunity for you to have this information. Also, these slides that Wilma presented will be posted on the acl.gov/SGRG webpage within the next 2 to 3 weeks, probably, once we pull all of the materials and resources. So it'll be publicly available and you can refer to it as you need to.
Greg, it looks like Melinda Baldwin from SAMHSA tried to ask a question that it's in the chat. Was there a concern from grandparents, grandfamilies in accessing services if they had their own mental health or substance use concerns? So I think that question is for Wilma.
Yeah,
so,
well, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for that question. Absolutely, that did come across. In the slide, you saw just a tidbit of that in reference to the feelings of loss, having to be the gatekeeper per se between the biological parent or parents and the child. And also the financial issues certainly caused mental stress as well. So there's certainly a need for support there as well. And and some of it went back to they don't know what they don't know as far as getting resources.
Any other questions for Wilma before we move on to the next portion of our agenda?
This is Gail. So yes. I do have a question that I love that it's going to be disseminated into a report. I personally would like to have this PowerPoint to produce some conversation in my own community, if that's at all possible.
Sure. Yeah, I believe that's possible.
I would say we will be posting the whole series of PowerPoint slides, but certainly to the council members, we could provide the slides.
Absolutely.
For your continued advocacy work on behalf of the council.
One of the other, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Greg.
One of the other things that we're going to be doing with this, with the analysis that Wilma did, we have an opportunity to have an infographic developed with all of this information. And we did a similar RFI with the Family Caregiving Advisory Council in response to the RAISE Act. We're doing infographics for both the RAISE RFI information as well as the grandparent information. And then we're looking at a third infographic, if it doesn't get too complex, to sort of show the intersections between the family caregiving, the family caregivers and the grandparent and kinship caregivers, doing a combined infographic with the combined analysis of both RFIs to kind of see where the overlap and the common issues and concerns are. So we've just started exploring that with our contractor. So members of the council will have that, an update on where we stand with that in the next couple of weeks. We're just kind of hashing through some of the details with the contractor now.
Greg, I think that's a great idea. Sorry, this is Martha Crowther again. I remember doing some research, but with grandparents raising grandchildren, I was struck by how many of them were taking care of grandkids, but also taking care of an older parent.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep.
And I mean, that's just, those interviews still haunt me with that particular subgroup of parent caregivers. that's a whole lot of caregiving with very limited resources. So I would love to see some work on that intersection.
Yeah. So we're going to be taking a look at to see where the information overlaps and where can we begin to draw some inferences and comparisons and things like that.
Good afternoon. This is Yvonne. How you guys doing? Great work. It really is. But what I wanted to know is, since we're going to get a transsectional between all those, do we have any demographic information as well to see if that had a barrier, like the demographics on some of this information, to see if it had a barrier on the need for the grandparents?
For this particular RFI, we did not ask for any demographic or identifying information from the people submitting. That would have created a level of complexity to this process that would have really quite significantly set us back. We were interested mostly in what the Supporting Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Act required us to collect in terms of public input and information about current challenges and programs, and with a special focus on tribal concerns and the impact of the opioid crisis. That's how we had to focus our information gathering. And so whatever demographics we have were Wilma presented, but they were just what we were able to pull out of the response or infer from the response. For example, if somebody said, you know, I live in a rural area, well, we were able to then say, yeah, we have at least one rural respondent, but we didn't ask a series of questions that tried to, you know, provide any level of demographic specificity.
And Greg, so that understood and is the case for the RFI responses, but the full report potentially could be featuring some demographic information based on census and other sources.
Absolutely, yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. That's already well in the works. Any other thoughts or observations or questions about the RFI? Okay, well, again, Wilma, thank you so much for your tremendous work on this. We really thank you for your dedication to this effort.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so we are going to move on to the next portion of the agenda, which is to hopefully reach consensus today on a set of recommendations to be included in the initial report to Congress. Late last week, each member of the council should have received a prep guide that has a set of 21 recommendation statements. These recommendation statements came out of our August subcommittee meetings and very, very closely mirror a complementary set of recommendations currently under consideration by the RAISE Family Caregiving Advisory Council. For those members of the council who were part of the subcommittee discussions, and I know there were a couple of you who had conflicts, you'll know that the conversation that we had during the subcommittee meetings last month was really lively and resulted in many, many edits and rewording and wordsmithing of each of the recommendations that we presented to you as a draft. Following those meetings, the subcommittee meetings last month, Lori and the rest of the ACL team and I did our very best to incorporate everyone's thoughts and ideas into each of the draft recommendations that we're going to be looking at today. So I want you also to keep in mind that these recommendations that we have listed are not our end point. And rather, these recommendations set the stage for a series of possible action steps under each that we're going to work on later, not today, but later on down the road. And so as you look at each one of these recommendations, as you read and consider each one, I want you to try to envision that each draft recommendation begins with the phrase, take steps to, and then you look at the recommendation. Doing this, at least I know, has helped remind me, and I think we're going to later come up with a very concrete series of actions and strategies that could be considered for possible inclusion into the National Caregiving Strategy. And a lot of those very concrete steps Wilma presented as recommendations. So we're going to hang all of that information is going to be moved forward. So we have organized the recommendations that we're going to be looking at today under 5 priority areas. Again, each of these 5 priority areas align with the RAISE Council's overall goal areas. And for the purposes of our discussion today, we're not going to be revising or modifying the priority areas. And our approach, what Lori and I would like to do with you all, is look at all of the recommendations under each priority area as a group, and then consider any minor changes or edits that you want to make any of them. Chantal will be making some notes in real time right on the screen so you can see what we're doing. And then our goal is to get through all 5 priority areas and reach final consensus on the recommendations under each. We have polling questions that are queued up should we need to take the temperature on any one recommendation or under any priority area, just to see that if we're getting to consensus. So Lori's going to get us started by leading you through discussions of priority areas 1 and 2. And then I'm going to step in and work on priority area 3. And then Lori will come back and take us through areas number 4 and 5. So any questions about what we need to do? This is really the sort of the working session of our meeting today. Any questions about how we're going to proceed?
Alrighty.
Okay, well, Lori, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Greg. All right, thanks everybody. Oh, excuse me. I don't know how to turn off chat. Bear with me. Keeps popping in up over what I'm looking at. So we're going to start with priority area 1, which it concerns the awareness of our outreach to kinship family and grand family caregivers. I was thinking we could look through these sort of one by one. However, if you have thoughts that overlap, I'm pretty flexible. Chantal's pretty darn quick with a typewriter, or computer, I should say. But looking at the first recommendation, increase public awareness and recognition of the unique strengths and needs of kinship and grand family caregivers and the importance of supporting them while they support the children in their care. Anyone thoughts, wordsmith, concerns, edits? As Greg said, because this helped all of us, take steps too, because we want to avoid things that are action, so recommendations. The actions, how to achieve the recommendation comes later. So does anyone have?
Laura, this is Jaya, and perhaps I should have asked this question when Greg was talking about process, but I don't have a comment on that particular one, but do have a comment on overall, if there is a plan to include some overarching recommendations. And in particular, I'm thinking about whether it's overarching or if we need to be more thoughtful about making sure we integrate this throughout, language about the importance of culturally appropriate services and promoting approaches that seek to address bias and structural racism. I think we need some language that specifically speaks to that. And then in addition to that, I know there were some great specific action steps around providing support for American Indian and Alaska Native tribes. I think we need some specific language around that as well. And maybe it's just looking at that throughout each priority area, but it seemed like that was a gap in what we have so far also.
Right, so you're saying, yeah, going backwards, well, it somewhat ties together the Alaska Native American tribe action steps. We want to make sure that recommendations, if an action step or a rationale incorporates, isn't, because of think about our mission and vision, intended to incorporate the cultural competency and the diversity of the families that we're working to help, which includes Alaska Native and Native American tribes, then we want to make sure we have some language in the recommendations that lends itself to that next step in the rationale or the action step. And so you're seeing that missing, like as an overall comment, and would find it helpful to have in all or in some places, depending, I'm putting words in your mouth now, but
yeah, I think I want to make sure that it's represented in the priority areas or in the recommendations. I think our mission statement captures it nicely and appreciate that, but it seems like there were gaps. The vision statement, apologies, yes.
No, they both, but yes, it's very important, I know, to the council. And is it, well, we don't want to pull apart. Is there a way to incorporate that into any or all of the recommendations, or do we sort of create within each a recommendation that talks about diversity and appropriateness, sort of the way the vision statement, respecting all families and that sort of, and the diverse nature of the families who are, kinship and grand families.
Yeah, I defer to the group on thoughts about that. I just noticed a definitive gap. So just wanted to acknowledge that. Yeah.
This is Gail. I recognize that as well, that in all of it, we need to recognize all kinds of adversity, Native American, low-income communities. I don't think we've done very good at really recognizing the different segments of people that need to be supported. I would think it needs to be, I don't know if it's at the beginning of the statement or if it should be included in each awareness. I think it should be in each awareness myself.
Yes, this is Sonia. I thank you, Jaya, for bringing that up. I had that in my notes for, I think, a little bit later in my one of these priority areas. But I think that's one of the components that are missing, but also too is that I noticed that since we're looking at under this particular act, we're looking at in regards to people who've been affected by the opiate crisis also, something to bring that forth besides the Native, the American Indians and Alaska Natives, Alaska Natives. I think initially something has to be put within each priority area. I made a note in a couple areas that I think when we get there, I can probably bring it up at that time, because I think we're just starting with the priority area 1. Yes. But I think initially at this point, that would be suggested that something would be put in the forefront before we start into the later portions of this document.
So this is Greg. If I can interject just a minute, because I think I probably should have maybe clarified up front. Our intent is to add narrative to each of these recommendations as well as to each of the priority areas. And so later on, once we agree on a set of recommendations, we're going to be looking to the council or some subset of the council to begin helping craft narrative explanations. So for example, adding a couple of paragraphs underneath priority area 1. What do we mean by this? What is the scope? Who are we trying to reach with this awareness and outreach? And then under each recommendation, who are the, how are we going to do this? Who are the intended target populations? What are some of the special needs and concerns that we have to address? Again, the need for cultural competence could be mentioned in any one of these or all of these if we want to, if that's what we decide is most effective, followed then later on by some very specific and concrete steps or strategies to bring that about.
Okay, so I'm sorry, this is Gail. So also then, one of my comments in this section was to calling out specific things, such as housing, legal. We know through Wilma's presentation, there are some really high priority things that need to be mentioned. It's going to be called out later then?
They could be mentioned generally in an upfront description of what goes into either that priority area or a specific recommendation. But then later on, you all could get down to crafting specific, and I'm just going to throw out an example. States should implement programs that increase or make available, affordable housing, and that's a terrible example, but it's something that specific that we can, begin to call out specific actions that some sector, whether it's the federal sector, the state level, the communities, whoever, could take on to bring about the realization of that recommendation.
And so that being said, you could also use that time to call out, keeping, so when, again, not a good example, but housing, we're going to call out housing, but we're also going to call out nature of low-income neighborhoods, call out that Native American Indians living on reservations, et cetera. That's really not a good example, but incorporate all that within that.
Correct, correct.
Hi, this is Tammy. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, Greg.
Go ahead.
I was sitting here thinking and listening. I think the cultural competency and calling out all of the diverse communities would be something that we might tighten up in the vision statement, mission statement, or we can, as Greg said, we're going to give some introductory paragraphs to each area, but we have to be mindful when we drill deeper and start really getting into the details of who's doing what. We have to be mindful of the audience that we're sending this this report to, and we have to be mindful of the level of authority that Congress may or may not have on states doing certain things. And so we have to be mindful of that. And because we don't want to just put a bunch of things in here, recommendations, states should do this, states should do that. And yet it just becomes that on paper that we recommend to Congress that states do some things, and Congress don't really have a whole lot of authority to come back and dictate that states will actually do it. So.
And keep in mind too, for our purposes right now, the report that we're developing and the recommendations that are going to be included, we are going to be stopping at the recommendations for the report. We're not going to get into specific action steps. That comes later as the National Caregiving Strategy gets developed and we begin bringing specific actions and strategies from your deliberations over into for inclusion into the National Caregiving Strategy. But for now, the recommendations will be, and the explanation under each will be the end point for the initial report to Congress.
Hi, this is Charlotte. I would just like to add, my part of the corner of the world here has to do with the opioid issue. And I think we all know that addiction has no boundaries in terms of cultural, racial, even any boundary at all, socioeconomic. I think in the beginning of the report, or however we want to start off, we might want to just be sure to include the idea that, the idea that it's supposed to cover everybody and not be specific to certain groups, and be inclusive of a community would be a good thing, because that does align with the opioid problem. So that's my 2 cents worth. Thanks.
No, thank you. And Sarah Markel, who is the taking the lead in pulling together the writing of the reports, taking notes, and that's an excellent point. So I'm going to let Lori take back over if we can focus on, back again on priority area 1 and the 3 recommendations that we have for consideration. Are there actual changes to the recommendations that you want, or do these broad statements that are the recommendations speak adequately to what we want to try to accomplish in priority area 1?
Thank you, Greg. So starting the conversation, do they, I can't see the priority area now. Chantal. Sorry, simple but short memory. So following that conversation, what do folks think?
I don't have any comment of changes.
Thank you, Gail.
This is Sonia. I don't have any recommendation. I mean, I don't have anything else. But I was just on 1.2. Let's see, right in the middle. And let me see. So it's like to enable them to recognize themselves or improve outreach to kinship families and grand families, to enable them to recognize themselves and understand how to access services. I'm not sure about the recognize themselves. I mean, maybe I'm just thinking a little bit too much about it. So is there another way possibly to reword it, or maybe I'm good with it, but I thought there's got to be another way to
I agree, Sonia.
Typo in there. I think that maybe you should have said
Hello?
caregivers. You know, 3 sets of eyes, we might not have caught everything.
Do you mean recognize themselves as caregivers? Is that kind of the point? I think
Yeah.
what we see is often people don't I don't know the term grand family. I don't know the term kinship family. Oh, this is a whole group of people and I'm a part of it. I just know that I'm a grandparent raising my grandchild. So I think that's what the goal is, to say, recognize that they are part of a group, you know, there's an effort to get help for. I don't know if adding that helps.
I think it does. Is there just something missing, or you can take that phrase right out, but
we do all know that caregivers are the last ones to know that they're caregivers, right?
Yeah.
And certainly if you bring in, if you're a kinship caregiver or grandparent grandfamily caregiver, you're a grandpa, I'm an aunt, I'm a neighbor friend. It's like, I'm a caregiver?
What about if
I think, this is Sarah, I think there's something, as you said, there's something missing in that phrase. And if I were reading it myself and didn't realize, I think to recognize themselves, I think Jaya said, as caregivers.
Yes.
You just need to insert something in there so that to recognize themselves as what? I mean.
Yeah, so
I was going to say the same.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the same thing. Recognize themselves as caregivers.
So with the additional words, 1.2 now reads, improve outreach to kinship families and grand families to enable them to recognize themselves as caregivers and understand how to access services and supports.
Yes.
I see head nodding.
Hello, this is Yvonne. Okay, I know that they need to recognize themselves as something, but as caregivers, I think they kind of know that they're caregivers, because to understand how to access services and support, I was looking at that because it resonated to me, but I wanted to be able to recognize themselves as a vulnerable population that even needs access to these things, because I think they know that they're caregivers, but to know that they're in a vulnerable situation, or in a need position, because they want to recognize them as this vulnerable population that needs to even understand how that they need services and support. I think I'm trying to, because I think they all know that they are caregivers. Am I thinking too much into this?
This is Charlotte. I was thinking about saying primary caregivers, because that elevates them as more than just caregivers. They're primary caregivers. They're this one-stop shopping, you know, the buck stops with them kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, something, because they need to recognize themselves, because I think they all know that they're caregivers, but something else needs to go in there, because basically following that, because to understand how to access services and support for this person. And primary caregiver, yeah, vulnerable, yeah, something, yes. That works better for me, putting primary in there. Thank you.
And what about just
This
maybe?
is Bat. Can I add something?
Sure.
Hey, this is Bat. Can I add something? I was thinking that as primary caregivers and understand how to fill their needs. I had it once, and how to fill needs. for services and supports. I'm not saying it exactly as I want it, but just because Ellen was mentioning that they may not understand or even
how to identify
recognize
their needs.
that what it is they
How to identify their needs for services and support. How to identify their needs.
Exactly.
This is Yvonne. I'm sorry. I was just trying to. How to identify their needs for services and supports. Yeah, because the first they have to know if they have an issue. Yes, ma'am.
Yvonne, this is Sarah. You could say how to identify and access, as well as access services and supports.
Yeah, you can. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
This is Sharon.
I'm sitting up here with a grandbaby myself right here.
This is Sharon Olson, and I guess one of the things that I found over all these years that was surprising when I would encounter another relative, a grandparent, another relative that was raising the children, is that they did understand they were caregivers, but what they struggled with was being able to accept the fact that they were actually in a category of raising the child. As long as the biological parents still had their parental rights in place, they felt like they were just kind of in limbo there, and we would encourage them to understand that you are the primary parent. You are actually doing the raising, doing, the hard work. And so that just seemed to be real surprising to them, that if they didn't have legal custody, or even if they did, if the parental rights were still in place, they just didn't quite step into the fact that this was something that they were actually doing or could be recognized they were doing.
And this is Gail. I agree with you, Sharon. And Yvonne, we talk about vulnerable population, and I don't like to use the word vulnerable population because that's not necessarily true. But they also need to recognize that they aren't the only ones. That they may be unique, but they are not the only person within that population.
What? This is Lori. It's 2:15. We got about an hour and 20 minutes or so. So thinking about this, what if we kind of improve outreach to kinship families and grand families to enable them to understand how to identify their needs and access services and supports? And we took out sort of this, all the qualifiers. Because there's some, they're primary parent, primary caregiver, some are, in the limbo, they're acting as the parent, but they're not recognized as the parent. There's so many situations that could arise. I know that sort of takes away from it, but then we get into the rationale and action where we can, flesh out the different scenarios of who or how. And I don't think it's redundant of number 1.1.
Right, because 1.1 is more the public outreach to the broader population to raise awareness about the importance of supporting kinship and grand family caregivers, whereas 1.2 is more about the families themselves and the individuals in that situation. And it's two different things.
So these three recommendations it starts at the public awareness level, then it moves to the family level, and then in the third one, it's looking at the full. We're again talking about information services and support, but now it's about to meet their personal needs and the needs of the children in their care. So again, this is a big umbrella statement. But it all fits. Does it fit under? Yes, Sharon?
Excuse me, this is.
Oh, I thought Sharon had something. Who?
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to interrupt. I can't hear the other thing. So the more I read recommendation 1.2, the more I see it as being improve outreach to kinship and grand families and help them to identify their needs and access to services and support. Enabling them kind of, to me, sounds like we don't give them recognition for them, you know, to know who they are.
So improve outreach to kinship families and grand families to help them identify their needs and access appropriate services and supports.
Yes.
This is Sharon. I think that we're getting away from the idea that the caregivers themselves need to be recognized as to the role that they're playing.
That's more in 1.1. No, I'm sorry. You're right. 1.2 though is more about sensitizing grand families and kinship caregivers to the fact that they are caregiving and that they may need services and supports.
Right,
So
but their identity, giving them an identity, helping them recognize that, yes, that's what I see and that 1.2 should be, and I'm afraid we're moving away from that now.
Okay.
Well, we had the primary caregiver statement, and then there was a comment on they know they're caregivers.
How about helping them identify their critical role as primary caregivers?
There you go. That's more what I'm trying to get at.
Thank you, Daya. Their critical role as primary caregivers. Now, what was there before? Are we in track changes? There'll be a lot of words pop up if we are. Hold on. To help them identify their critical role as primary caregivers and understand how to access.
This is Charlotte. I was going to suggest.
Yes, please.
After primary caregivers, identify their critical role as primary caregivers so they seek access to services and support. Suggestion. Thanks.
Thank you. Chantal, you want to go back to simple markup? Sorry.
Because I think what we're getting at here is we want to inspire those in this situation to be proactive and, you know, fulfill needs that they have.
Oh, this is Sharon again, and they do need that identity. Otherwise, they feel, too many of them think they're only babysitters. They're, you know, just filling in, when in reality, they actually are in a critical role and a decision-making position for the children.
So is this 1.2, what is people comfortable with this as it is now? Or is it still?
Looks good to me.
It looks good to me.
I think it's better because it keeps with what we originally thought that was to be.
And when we go to do rationale and get into the weeds of how to implement, it gives the house, it gives a strong foundation to build on all the things we have. And then the third one, increase kinship families and grand families' awareness of and access to the full range of available information, services, and supports to help them meet their needs and the needs of the children in their care.
And this gets at, I think, some of the points that were brought out in the RFI, that they don't know what they don't know, and that could be a whole lot. And so we would have, ideally, this is a broad recommendation within very specific steps underneath it later on.
I think 1.3 is pretty clear.
I agree.
I agree.
This is Gail. I just want to quickly,
Yes.
comment that Wilma did such a great job in her presentation as saying grant and kinship families, which that was just brilliant to me. And I don't know how everybody else feels about that. I just thought it was just a great way of recognizing us.
Thank you, Gail. I think Wilma may still be on. I'm not sure, but if not, we'll make sure she gets that feedback. I think
I was
good
just
way to
it might be nice to put it in this document as well, because it's wordy that trying to find a way to, we've always talked about what kinship and grandfamilies, because they want to be recognized as different, because kinship providers who are aunts and uncles are not grandparents. We've always talked about that. And so putting it in a wordage that is understandable by other people, I just felt that saying grand and kinship families seems to be less wordy and drawn out. I just wanted to just say that and see if we wanted to change that at all.
Okay, I think this is Greg. For the interest of time, we can note that suggestion, and we've got it there, and we can take that up with you all at a later date, but we really need to move through these if we're going to reach consensus on all 5 priority areas and keep this process moving. Is that okay with folks?
And so we're ready to move on to priority area 2. This has to do with the caregiver engagement. And I think some of these start to speak to indirectly, but a little more directly to what Shaya and Sonia and Gail and others were talking about earlier. Just going through them, ensure kinship and grandfamily caregivers are recognized as an integral part of the child's care team, engaged in programs that are family-centered and cognizant of the conflicting goals in care. Increase the use of comprehensive assessments to determine caregiver and family strengths and needs when identifying appropriate services for kinship families and grandfamilies who are seeking help. Increase the inclusion of kinship and grandfamily caregivers and young people in the planning of services by all relevant entities such as child welfare, aging, income support, and community-based organizations and service providers. I thought we took meaningfully out. Oh, well. Meaningfully increase the inclusion of the topic of kinship families and grandfamilies in the education curricula and programs for healthcare, social workers, child welfare, legal, judicial, education, aging, disability, palliative care, and related.
I don't know who they work for though. One comment that I have that 2.3 to
mute. Gail?
Yes.
Okay, Gail's talking.
To put in inclusion of kinship and grandfamilies voices. I just was in my notes was including voices.
On 2.4?
2.3.
2.3. Increase the inclusion of kinship, family, and grandfamily caregivers and young people's voices.
Yes.
There you go. Thoughts, wordsmiths on any of them? Right, voices. I want them to, so you're hearing, listen. That is what this recommendation's getting at.
So I guess by the silence, everybody's in general consensus that this set of recommendations under priority area 2.2 is pretty good as written.
So we can move on to area 3.
I see Linda Davis has raised her hand. Linda, your microphone's open. Did you have a question or a comment?
Oh, thank you very much. I'm sorry. It was a while ago, Greg, and the what I did want to say was the question of the use of the term caregiver, and who identifies as what has of course come up in the RAISE task force, and also in our federal advisory committee that is families, caregivers, and survivors, and that's the one chaired by Senator Dole. So this is a very common dilemma to help and encourage people to see themselves in a way that may provide them with additional resources or even acknowledgement of the, physical and mental financial challenges they may be facing, and help reduce the stigma. At the same time, it's important not to put labels on people that they're not comfortable with, and that can be a cultural thing, that can be a generational thing, that I'm not a caregiver, I'm his spouse, I'm his grandmother, this is what a family does. So it's a delicate balance, but we have some ways we've tried to split that, and we're glad to share that with either RAISE or the advisory committee. I thought the group did a great job of coming to some, respectful resolution. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, if you wanted to share that, that would be great. We can take a look at it. So,
Charlotte, in 2.4, why do we have palliative care in there? I see that as a unrelated matter.
Well, palliative care can be provided to anybody of any age.
Okay, I always see that as after, like hospice and palliative care. That's how I see that term being used.
Yeah, they're often used together, but they are separate, and palliative is more about, the managing of symptoms and comfort and things like that.
If you have a medically, if you have a child who's, has got some medical.
But no, I agree. It can be.
We could take it out.
I mean, it may just be me. I just only relate that to hospice care.
Just asking the rest, anyone else in the group, did that kind of raise an eyebrow? Sorry, Gail?
It raised my eyebrow. I didn't like it.
Okay.
Well, there we go. Two out of 30. It's almost unanimous. I mean, we'd take it out, and because it clearly has an inferential meaning, so we don't really want that in the recommendation part. It could be addressed later on if chosen to, where it can be clarified what is meant by, in this context. So does that, thank you, Charlotte, for bringing that up. Does that make these feel more comfortable? Any more thought, discussion, please?
I agree with taking it out. If we're going to put palliative in there, there's a lot of other words that can be put in there with palliative that don't necessarily need to be. So I think it ought to be taken out.
It's everything else is broader, and that's starting to get a little more specific. So we'll keep it broader. Okay with everything else that's in there?
This is bad. I agree with everything that's in there. I hope that what is in there is inclusive of planning in the event that someone is either incapacitated or deceased and have that caregiver or grandparent. Because I remember that being part of our discussion, at least during our COVID planning.
Oh, yes.
And I think that's actually coming up in the next priority area, if I'm not mistaken, or something related to that.
All right, well, we'll watch for it there. Thank
you. Yeah. Okay, any final thoughts on priority area 2, or are we good with this and we can move on to 3? Okay, let's move on to 3. This is services and supports for kinship families and grand families. What I want to point out is we've got several, in the first several draft recommendations, we have words bolded. We organized this particular set of recommendations around how the National Family Caregiver Support Program is organized around its 5 required services and supports. So it's access to services and supports, respite, counseling, training, and education, and then we have later on references to supplemental types of services. So that's sort of how this is arranged, and so we try to bucket the broad service categories that may be necessary to support family caregivers and kinship and family and grand families. So thoughts on any of these recommendations? We have 7 of them under this particular priority area.
I have a few thoughts on the existing ones and then some thoughts on several additional recommendations.
Okay.
So the first one, 3.1, I thought it might be worth calling out specifically, such as through kinship navigator programs. If that's too specific and is better as a follow-up, I'm fine with that, but just wanted to acknowledge that. On 3.2, I was thinking we could perhaps add "and childcare" there. Potentially, childcare could be its own recommendation, or we could just add it in with respite care. I certainly defer to the group with either of those. Recommendation 3.3, I'll do another one, and then I don't know if you want me to pause and hear from others.
Keep going.
3.3, I thought it was worth mentioning support groups. So increase availability of types of culturally competent trauma-informed counseling, education, kinship and grand families, including support groups, best practices, models, and then perhaps this is a note maybe that's in the follow-up, but including specifically calling out including support to help children with behavioral challenges. I think people tend to think around mental health with this, but behavioral health would be helpful too. Then I thought, speaking to the previous comment from a number of council members about specifically highlighting the need for supports related to substance use, that perhaps following here could be a recommendation about providing support to families to understand and address issues related to the impact of opioids and other substance use on the children and family. And I specifically mentioned opioids because that's in the law.
So are you thinking like a recommendation 3.8, have something entirely?
That's my feeling. Potentially you could put it with the counseling. It could be substance use related counseling, but I feel like it warrants its own, especially since this council was, charged specifically to look at that issue.
So we'll just make a note ahead of that that just says just potential new recommendation. Yeah, that's it. And then we can look at it and then we'll just incorporate it into the numbering accordingly if you all decide to adopt that.
Another potentially additional one, although folks may have thoughts about where to add this, but the use, expanding the use of peer-to-peer supports that engaged experienced caregivers in helping other kinship families and grand families, such as hiring them as kinship navigators or to co-facilitate support groups. And maybe we don't need to include the "such as," but there's a real movement and some growing research on just the value of those peer-to-peer supports. So whether that's its own recommendation or maybe noted elsewhere, I'm open to that.
This is Sharon. I really would like to see that have its own specific space, because it just is really an answer to so many things that we're dealing with. And I think it should be on its own and fully recognized.
I agree.
Okay.
And hi, this is Patrick. I agree with what John's talking about, whether it be put in 2.1 or elsewhere. Something in there about a kinship navigator program. You know, through the Family First Prevention Services Act, a big piece of that is kinship navigator programs. So I think with that being a federal piece of legislation and this being a federal advisory council, that we should probably plug that in here somewhere and make sure that that's recognized, because that's definitely something that they're looking at in other venues.
Sure. So that recommendation, that idea for a new recommendation related to that, is that not covered broadly in 1.1, and then later on you could have a specific action underneath it that would say, you know, we need to have a new kinship navigator program or something like that? Or do we really think it's a thing unto itself, a recommendation unto itself?
You're asking if it's covered in 1.1?
Yes.
The increasing public awareness?
Yeah, if that concept is what you all are talking about around the kinship navigators is already, could it be, no, I'm sorry, go to 3.1, I'm sorry, 3.1. Yeah. Isn't that an issue of access, improving access?
It is, and that's almost why I think that kinship navigation needs to go in there, is because you're specifically talking in regards to access and needed services and supports, and that is what a kinship navigator helps with.
Okay.
So I just feel like that term ought to certainly be plugged into these recommendations somewhere, and I think 3.1 is as good of a place as any to put it.
And so you're fine with how we've got it there? In 3.1?
That looks
yes.
That looks great to me
Okay.
in terms of including navigators. I think there's a separate point about peer-to-peer supports. And we don't have to necessarily name navigator in the description, but I think the peer-to-peer supports is an important point. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is Sharon. I agree that the peer-to-peer is a whole unit on itself. It's an idea that is often missed. I mean, we get all sorts of professionals out there, but yet the ones that really provide the most important support or the most valuable and comfortable to other caregivers just starting on this journey is knowing that person that is they're talking to or they're working with actually has experienced what they're experiencing. That just is just something that's overlooked or seems to fall by the wayside. So I know what Jai is saying, that we really need to highlight that all on its own, even separate from the idea of a navigator program. That this is really where your strength and your value of any kind of a program out there comes from, is getting peer-to-peer.
Great.
Excuse me, this is that follow or be included in recommendation 2.6, which talks about expanding the use of volunteers and mentors, because it would seem like that peer-to-peer will.
I think we did discuss the term mentoring and something, and I'm not sure just where it's falling in all of this, but I remember a lot of discussion on it. And yes, that would be our peer-to-peer, but we may need to even, emphasize a little more peer-to-peer.
Okay, because if we go down to 3.6, expand the use of, volunteers, mentors, and peer-to-peer, supports, would that, without then adding another recommendation, would that, by calling out specifically peer-to-peers there, would that make sure that that issue is addressed and then we have steps underneath it later on?
I think that's a good place for it.
I like that. Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah, we're okay.
Okay.
This
So,
is really,
yes.
I apologize. So I agree with that approach as well to 3.6. Did you want to finish your point there, Greg, before I move on?
So no, so I think, so we have, so it looks like we've reworked 3.6 to get in the peer-to-peer concept, which is great. We have a new recommendation around that speaks specifically to substance abuse counseling and opioid. Are there, I guess, looking from 3.1 down to about, I guess, the new one around addictions, substance abuse, are there any changes we want to make in those first few, or can we move on towards the latter portion of this list under priority area 3?
I have one suggestion thinking of 3.3, talking about increasing the availability of services within the rural community and those that have low income, I forget what they said, improve rural areas and areas of poverty and disparity.
Okay.
Do we need to put something in there about that arena?
Or, well, we could talk about it in the rationale that how for people in rural areas, this is of a particular concern and would also be a challenge for which specific types of interventions may need to be developed.
Greg, could that be this is Sonia, could that be inclusive with tribal?
Sure.
Tribal, well, you can put it in there, but like remote, I always say remote areas, but rural areas also too, but, and then put inclusive with the reservations or, because I think initially at some point, I mean, even being like from Eastern Kentucky, I lived there. Most of those places are so remote and they're so rural, they're actually like reservations.
Sure.
So, I mean, tribal communities, so I think that just put it as one, instead of just, I was thinking about maybe just putting for tribal communities, but I think it encompasses everything in regards to rural areas, remote areas, and then also.
Yeah, rural, including, remote, frontier, and tribal. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
This is Sharon, and I understand the need to address the opioid, crisis, and I understand all of that. But one of the things that struck me right off the bat, listening to Alex Azar, is I appreciated personally that he listed the non-negative reasons for raising grandchildren first, rather than last as an afterthought, because there are a whole lot of us that are raising grandchildren not necessarily due to drug addiction. So I really appreciated it. It stood right out to me, and I know we have to address, the drug addiction stuff, but too often it seems lately that the rest of us are just kind of, I don't know, not recognized as much, that there are other reasons for raising these grandchildren that are actually on a positive note, and not necessarily all that negative. So
absolutely.
This is Bev Young, if I may jump in here. So on recommendation 3.4, I would like this to be a little bit more specific. I think that all of these recommendations really are meant to advance the social determinants of health and well-being for kinship families and grandfamilies. But one thing that I think we have identified as a need, but may not have a recommendation to address, is the individual well-being of the caregivers themselves. And so I just suggest maybe changing kinship families and grandfamilies to the caregivers rather than the whole family. I mean, of course, we want to address the needs of the entire family, but if we can have, one recommendation that's focused on the well-being of caregivers, because they so often neglect their own needs in favor of, addressing their children's needs, I think that would be helpful. It could be a separate recommendation or just, tweaking this one slightly. And then the other, thank you. I can see that you're taking copious notes. And then the second comment I had was regarding recommendation 3.7. I think this goes to something that a member of the public mentioned, that there was a question about whether there's a recommendation regarding legal needs and advocacy. I think, my reading of this recommendation was that this may have been broadened, but my understanding of, reducing the financial barriers to access needed services and supports, I read as, so often there are legal needs and advocacy that are either too expensive for grandparents to afford or are really depleting their savings when they try to access those legal services. And so I'm wondering if we can either tweak that recommendation to make it speak to the legal information and assistance and navigational services that are necessary, or to add a separate recommendation. The way that I tweaked this was to say identify and reduce challenges that make it difficult for kinship family and grandfamily to access legal information assistance, and then navigational services and other necessary support. So it's just those removing barriers to getting the legal information assistance specifically.
I would affirm that and think that the legal piece really needs its own recommendation. I drafted some language I'm happy to drop in the chat box as well.
Yeah, if you want to do that, and then we can cut and paste that over, because I see that Liliana Hernandez wanted to go up to recommendation 3.3 to talk about working specifically with schools to address any educational needs in addition to behavioral needs of the child. So we could put that in. That may actually be possible or most appropriate to do within a rationale that talks about the breadth of what this recommendation could be about, and then propose specific actions about working with schools to, to address education. Wait, I have to go back up here. Educational needs. I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep track of what's happening in the chat box as well. Okay, if we could, Chantal, can you go over to the chat box and grab Beverly's new recommendation for 3.7, and then up above that is Jaya. They're both kind of similar. They deal with legal. So how do we feel about that? Are we, as a replacement to what was there for 3.7, are we okay with this new language?
Excuse me.
Yes?
I'm wondering if, legal information or legal services, because that's the financial barrier exists from, in my opinion, from the service, not.
Right. We could put in, reference to both legal and financial, because there definitely are those.
I think, this is framed as reducing barriers. I had framed it as improving availability and access. I guess it's to the same end. I do worry that there's just not enough out there already. So the degree to which it's barriers or the degree to which we also just need more of an investment.
And so
Anyway,
maybe
that's why I came at it from the improve availability.
Yeah, so
and
maybe
access
get
angle.
rid of identify and reduce the barriers and go up and, what were your new words, Jaya?
Chantal, can you
Improve
copy Jaya's words so we can see both? Sorry.
Improve availability and access. And I said to free and or affordable quality legal services.
This is
legal information and services. Legal services and information would be fine to build off of what Beverly has done.
This is Sonia. I've got just a small comment regarding what Jaya is talking about. I think initially what happens is that as a grandmother was raising my grandkids, is that you're given the opportunity to get free or limited legal services, but yet you're still on the basis of there's a trust factor. So we're not assuring, there's no assurance that you're doing to the best of my capability to keep my children or betterment of of myself. It's during those times you basically are in a whirlwind of things that are going around you, and all of a sudden you've got all this legal stuff to encompass within your lives that you never had to deal with before. So I think I'm just thinking about how to put it in words in regards to assurance that this is going to be, they're ensuring something that, yes, it's going to be okay, that, you can trust us about this. I don't know. It's just a quick thought, because that's what was going through my mind when I was reading this. Because like I say, as a grandparent, the first thing I thought, I don't know what you guys are going to do. I didn't know what to, because you have so many other things you got to deal with. And I think that's one of the things, if you're just saying, we can, give you this assurance, or you can trust us, or something of that nature. I don't know, but it might be just a fluke thought, but that's what was coming through my head when I was reading this.
Okay.
That's
So are we okay with the new phrasing for 3.7?
We kind of lost what does it bring in Beverly's thoughts as well? Yes. Okay.
Yes, I think it addresses my concerns. And my only thought in response to Sonia was that instead of legal information, we could use the word guidance, which maybe speaks just a little bit to, helping ensure people that feel that they have some guidance or some advocacy there.
I mean, we could definitely insert guidance there if we wanted to, that speaks to the access piece.
Instead of services, or as well as them?
As well as legal information, guidance, and services.
Yeah.
So this might not be necessary, but this would be access to legal help for anything, right? So I don't know if we want to put a little bit on the end that says, I mean, I had to gain decision-making authority as necessary for the children in their care. Just something that, the legal help is so that they can provide for the kids, so that they can help the kids.
Does that limit it to just decision-making? Are there other legal needs beyond decision-making authority?
Well, this is Charlotte. I mean, definitely custody comes into play.
Yeah. So if the more specific we get in a recommendation, the more that limits us later in the action steps that could come underneath it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there are housing and benefits questions also addressed through legal means.
Sounds good.
Okay. Looking at the totality of what we have under priority area 3, are there other changes that you all want to propose to any of the the recommendations that are under priority area 3?
I have 3 other concepts.
Okay.
That could either be new or in existing places. So one
Okay.
is affordable housing, you know, which is related to financial help, but I think warrants its own piece. So I just had improve access to safe and affordable housing options. And I specifically said, including housing specifically designed for kinship families and grand families with on-site support services. So I'm happy to drop that into the box.
So that would be an entirely new recommendation, 3.8.
That's my instinct.
Housing specific to, thank you, Jaya.
Yeah.
Kinship
apologies
families
for
and
not getting
grand
these.
families with on-site supportive services. Jaya just put it in the chat. Chantal.
Yeah. I have to say, I'm sorry I didn't catch these in the earlier process. There's something about seeing everything in its final form that makes you realize additional pieces would be helpful. So thank you for this. And then the next one is related to, let's see here. Oh, pieces related to the child welfare system. So there's a whole set of challenges that kinship families interacting with child welfare have. So I have improved child welfare system approaches to better prioritize the placement of children with relatives when they can't remain with their parents and tailor supports and training to their unique needs. So
Can you just drop that into the
drop
chat
that
box,
too.
please?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
This is Gail. I would like to see something about financial supports that keep families from going further into poverty. And I'm not sure. I'm thinking about like the TANF and child support and things like that to decrease those barriers so they don't go further into poverty. Am I thinking that maybe that should be somewhere in here?
I think that's covered in the next section, or there's potential. There's a whole section after this, right?
Yeah, we have stuff on financial. Chantal, can you go into the chat box and grab that new recommendation that Jaya posted, please? That's very well. It's wordy, but I'm wondering if we can. I'm wondering if that recommendation could stop at when they cannot remain with their parents, and then where you get into the specifics about tailoring supportive services and training, address barriers, would those be specific actions that would help to bring about the realization of that recommendation?
I think if we said better prioritize and support placement of children with relatives, then we
Okay.
could maybe drop the rest.
Okay, better prioritize and support. Okay. Because then you can get into all of the different ways that we can do that later on. Okay, that's good. And then let's leave that text down there just as a reminder for later on.
This is Sonia. I don't know if you want to include the Indian Child Welfare Act because it's very specialized in its own way.
Mm-hmm.
But that might be on something that you were talking about having a narrative afterwards. But that could be footnoted in there somewhere.
Yeah, definitely.
And also, I just have on the little chat here, on 3.5, you have expand the use of technology as means of supporting kinship families and grand families. And would it be possible to have something to talk about, when you talk about technology, I'm assuming it's like computer access and things of that nature. Sometimes there's places that do not have the affordability to have internet, or maybe there's no internet available within this particular remote areas. So I don't know, it was kind of like aloof. I wasn't sure what you meant by the terminology of use of technology. So
the way the Family Caregiving Advisory Council has looked at it, it means everything. So it would be everything from the internet access and the infrastructure down to providing or making equipment available to allow folks to access. So that would be the broadest possible way, and then we could get into some specifics later on underneath
within the
that.
narrative. Okay, I just want to clarify that. All right, thank you.
Yep.
So I have one more area for this section, and that's around accessing higher education support for the children. So I will drop that into the chat as well. We see just huge barriers in terms of financial support, but also navigating college and making decisions and applications and all of those pieces.
So when you're also talking about education, Jaya, I don't know if this is the right place, but we also have to think about the children with special needs, access to providing services for children with special needs, assessment of children with special needs, support of children with special needs. That is a real concern I have.
Good point.
So Chantal, if you can go over and grab the new 3.10, and I think we could, education for children, including those with special needs, so that we call that out specifically.
That's a good point. Mine was about higher education, but we probably need one just for education, and then we could.
So I think how about provide supports to help grant families, something more broadly about education, and then we could get specific later on about higher education versus and have a specific action step or steps around the real specifics of it. Again, the recommendations are meant to be higher level. And so we're talking about taking steps to support grant families in education, navigating the educational system, whatever that means. And then, later on, the steps could be tailored to special needs populations, things of that nature.
This is Sharon. I appreciate that you've putting more effort into or more focus on the special needs, but I'd like to mention that when you say children, you think of someone under 18, where there are many of us that have young adults that have such special needs that we're still providing care for them. So if we could make sure that we're not losing that particular group. They're young adults, but they're still dependent on you.
Well, and I agree, Sharon, and also there's kind of a difference between seeing to the needs of children and adult children with special needs, also versus being able to provide a college education. So those are almost two separate things.
This is Lori. Didn't we have a recommendation that spoke about education where, we're getting I'm sorry, Greg, we're getting pretty specific.
I know.
We had a recommendation. Can you scroll up, Chantal, please? Keep going. Here, 3.3. Oh, that's trauma informed. Okay, maybe it was in one of mine. I thought we had something. Scroll up again to the 2s.
That's in
Are we going
curricula for
it's in 2.4.
Yeah, that's the education curricula for professionals, not for children or the young adults.
But it sounds like maybe somewhere we need a recommendation about improving access to education, and then the rationale and the action. It talks special needs children, higher education, training services for adults with special needs or so a broader statement about education.
How about if there's one on education that includes higher education, and then there's another one on supporting families caring for children with disabilities broadly?
That I don't think we need to separate the two for two separate. I think we just need to be inclusive at a broader level. When you look at education systems today, they just don't stop at 12th grade. They go into the higher ed, and in higher ed, there are supports there for students with special needs and who need special supports and accommodations. I think it sounds like we're backing away from a lot of the work that we did previously and making broader statements, and then the action steps will outline some of these other steps.
I agree. The recommendations cannot be so granular that there's no way to further break them down underneath that into any meaningful step. So the recommendations have to, remember what I had said at the beginning of this exercise, take steps to what do you want to do? And then we leave it there. And then it's later on we develop the action steps, and we're not there yet at the action steps.
And we have to, I can't say this enough, we have to continuously to be mindful of the audience that we're sending these recommendations to. They just want to hear the broader recommendation. And if they hear in that recommendation, additional funding, additional services, where's the money coming from? We don't want to shut folks down from moving forward on these action steps. We want to give the broader, and then when we break down what we need to do to make it happen, that's when the action steps will come forward.
And I'd also like to remind folks, we have 20 minutes left on our agenda with 2 more priority areas to go through. So, and the goal today was to come to consensus on these so that we can keep our work on track and get the the recommendations finalized. And so we've added now 3 more it looks like 3 new recommendations under priority area 3, which is great, but we need to keep them broad and actionable later on.
This is Sharon. I guess I would just put the action steps to include children and young adults with special needs, and just putting the young adults right after children.
And we are talking children and young adults who are in the care of grandparents or kinship families, and and not their parents, because we're addressing that in the Family Caregiving Advisory Council.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll just, as a person that elevated higher education, I totally support it going under a subheading of education. I think that's great. I just wasn't sure if the folks that were raising the questions about disabilities felt like, supporting families that have kids with disabilities is more than just in the education sphere. There's other pieces to it. So I defer to those that elevated that for how they want that represented, but I'm totally support, the higher education being a subtopic that's identified later is fine.
But as the person who kind of brought this up, I totally feel that finding supports for children and adult children with disabilities is a completely different thing than affording children being able to go to college. I think it is 2 separate things.
I agree.
But could those 2 concepts be addressed under a single recommendation that deals with education?
Yes.
I'm fine with the college one. I'm not, I defer to Gail and Sharon on the others.
Well, the way it's structured now in the education system, the Office of Rehabilitative Services deals with adults past the college are those adults with disabilities who just choose to go into the workforce. And so we could use the broader term and then in the action steps, make sure that we are intentional with calling out the supports that go for persons with disabilities outside of going for higher ed, those who tend to need assisted living services and go out into the workforce and independent living environments.
Okay, so are we are we okay with the wording, the general wording of 3.10, provide supports to help grand families, and we will tweak the language, access education for, well, it's more than children according to how you want children and young adults, because
people with disabilities.
For children and people with disabilities?
Would the word minors, I'm sorry, would the word minors be of assistance? MINORS at all? Just throwing it out.
Well, that, I mean, that's, yeah, that in place of children?
Yes, instead of trying to say young adults, adolescents, children, you know, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
If they're all minors, they're under somebody's care up to what age, 18?
Okay.
Yeah, but we have those that are over 18 that it's just when it says children, you always think of under, and some of them are over, and they still have educational needs. There's being educated in some way, trained, educated, something. I guess I just like adding the young adults in there.
And the IDA law is not just until 18. It could go to 22 or 23, depending on the state.
How about 33?
Well, 33 will be the persons with disabilities. I think we can capture it. Persons with disabilities.
Okay.
What about the word dependence then?
Ooh.
Okay, thanks, Greg.
Okay, that's fine. So we have, can we go back up to the top of priority area 3 to see, again, are we fine with 3.1 on down in terms of how these recommendations are worded?
Question under 3.1, the red that Carmen sent earlier, that's crossed out, right?
Yeah, that was Carmen Sanchez's proposed rewording of 3.1. It makes it, we have to get rid of the word likelihood because that is too, it's too outcomes in nature. And so, you know, her proposed rewording was very straightforward and simple. And I will tell you that this is the rewording of recommendation 3.1 under the Raise Council. It's a very straightforward, simple sentence about increasing access to information services and supports. Because then there's a world of things that can happen underneath that.
I like it.
Okay.
Works for me.
The red one.
Yeah, we're just going to go with the red one, the rewording. Are there any other? So we have the 3 or so new recommendation areas that Jaya proposed. Are we okay with including those? Do you want to add those 3 new recommendations to the original 7 that we had?
Yes.
Are we okay with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Sonia, yes.
Okay. So we have the general wording. I think, you know, thanks to Jaya typing things into the chat box, we were able to lift. We will drop those in as 3 new recommendations under priority area 3. Okay, any other thoughts on priority area 3 before I turn it back to Lori for to take us through 4 and 5? Okay, Lori, I'm going to give it back to you to go through areas 4 and 5.
Okay, we have by our agenda 4 minutes to go through priority areas 4 and 5.
We can take it to 3:30 and then I'll wrap up quickly at the end. So
yeah, I was gonna say we can run a little longer, but It's, so this has to do with financial and workplace security for the kinship and grand family caregivers. First one sort of speaks to one of the comments in their own words that Wilma brought up earlier. Financial support children, so they are not financially burdened. Broad adoption of workplace policies, flexibilities, and practices. It's a fundamental part of work life. Tailored resources that families can use to make informed financial decisions and plan for future financial needs. Increased prevalence and use of future planning to ensure members of families have needed supports in place to provide for future needs of both the caregivers and the children.
This is
Sharon. Is there a chance that instead of burdened, you put something along the disadvantaged?
Absolutely. When I read the word burdened, I thought that's got to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
4.1.
Hi, this is Melinda.
They are not financially disadvantaged.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry, someone was about to speak and I overspoke.
This is Charlotte. Are we comfortable with using the word children then, based on what we said before? Just asking.
Good question.
Well, could it be for those in their care, making it a bit more general? Oops, what happened?
I have a feeling Chantal's computer may have just gone weak.
No, there it is.
It is.
That sounds good for those in their care. Yes.
Recommendation. This is Bev Young. I submitted some wording. You can take or leave, but I try to focus on the structural barriers because I think that it will be inevitable that people are financially burdened by their caregiving responsibilities to some extent. What we can do is to address the barriers to access to public benefits and other support that are available, because so many people do not avail themselves either because they're not aware or because there are, as I said, there are policy and other bureaucratic barriers to their accessing those things.
So Bev, your proposed rewording is as follows. This would be for 4.1. Address structural barriers that prevent kinship and grand family caregivers having accessing to public benefits and other financial support.
Yes, sorry, I copy pasted from my.
Well, that's okay. We'll need to.
Yeah, it sometimes includes words that I crossed out, so I apologize.
That's all right.
If you're talking about, where'd it go? If you're talking about structural barriers is broader than policies, but in the discussion and rationale, one can get into policies.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay, Chantal, can we go over and grab the new proposed language for 4.1 that Beverly just put in, and we can wordsmith it later, but we want to get that concept down.
Beverly also offered some wording for 4.4 in the chat. And then, wait. Melinda from SAMHSA notes the wording in 4.4 let you increase the availability and use of ... However, the recommendation as a whole is confusing as it is worded. So Melinda, maybe when you see Beverly's new thought, that'll help clear up some of that confusion. Sounds like 4.4 Okay, so Beverly, we have, and everyone underneath recommendation 4.1 where it says address structural barriers. This was a rewording that Beverly proposed. And then under 4.4, this is yours also, Beverly. Grand families have the take steps to, then we'd have to say, like, ensure grand families have the resources they need to engage in advanced planning so that they may provide for their children's care in the event of illness or incapacity.
Care, thank you. Yeah.
The one concern I have in this section is that we have families that are financially well, modest means families that then take on their children and then are forced into poverty, as I talked before about that and placing them further into poverty. None of these recommendations address that at all.
Well, is that, what was 4 point? We just had one on financial, number 1, financially disadvantaged.
This is Sharon. That's why I like the fact that we're saying that they're not financially disadvantaged, because that really puts it into what Gail is saying, that, you know, we have one standard of living, and then taking on the children completely puts us at a disadvantage. So I liked that.
Don't delete that. Don't delete that.
Stop. Put it back.
There.
Thank you, please.
Also, too, this doesn't, it encompasses
So,
people who are.
I'm sorry, Sonia.
I'm sorry, this is Sonia. People who had to basically cash in their retirement at a later age. That's what you have to go on,
Right.
and all of a sudden you have to cash in. Now you're becoming very comfortable into, you know, basically deficit, almost, well, you are devastated. Now you got to look for a job because you have to go back into the workforce to support.
Well, or we have to give up a career that we had.
Right.
And so it puts us in that realm. I mean, I think we look at barriers, structure, you know, as far as public benefits in a lot of other places, but I think this is the only place that we actually put it out there that we're disadvantaged. I mean, we are really thrown into another whole realm.
Right.
So I really think 4.1, the way we had it, is extremely important.
I agree. I read that now, and yes, I think that's really a good one.
And I'd like to say what comes to mind is the Family Leave Act. There is no coverage for that these situations.
And so that could potentially be a specific action step underneath 4.1 where, you know, changes are proposed to the FMLA that would make it, you know, more.
So Beverly's reword could become an action step. Is that what you're saying? I mean, a structural barrier is there's no FMLA.
I'm coming over to your idea. I see how promoting policies that prevent kinship and grandfamily caregivers from being financially disadvantaged by their responsibilities can be this overarching theme for the rest of the recommendations. And then this, addressing the structural barriers might be one sub-recommendation or an action step, but it's really in support of this overarching theme, which I think is broad enough that the other recommendations also fall under their umbrella. So that I tend to agree. I submitted a slightly reworded 4.1. It's really using the same words, just shortened a bit.
And Chantal is having issues accessing the chat, so Beverly,
promote policies that and prevent kinship and grandfamily caregivers from being financially disadvantaged by their caregiving responsibilities. So it just takes out some text in between.
Tightens it up, or does it?
Yep. Caregivers from being financially disadvantaged.
So if you guys could see the chat, because I think that may be why Chantal's computer went a little wiggy for a minute. It's not easy for her to shift to the chat.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's,
I think that's good.
The overall idea.
Thoughts, anyone?
Yes, I think it does help.
You like it more succinct? But it still keeps the concept? Okay. Are we?
The one other concept for this section was tax credits. It's just promoting and improving access to tax credits. And I don't know if that seems like that fits under somewhere, but maybe it's a specific recommendation.
Well, wouldn't that be a policy? Wouldn't that be a policy? A specific action step under 4.1?
That's what I'm offering that as something. I don't want to lose the concept.
And then we have below 4.4, we have Beverly's potential rewording and slight simplification of the idea in 4.4.
Grand families have the ensure grand families have the resources they need to engage in advanced planning so that they may provide for the children's care in the event of illness or incapacity, which you're offering instead of increased prevalence of use of future planning to ensure members of kinship families and grand families have the needed supports in place to provide for the future needs of, that is a lot of words, both the caregivers and children.
The wording does shift the focus to the children, but I think in advanced planning, generally in this context, I think we are focusing on the needs of the children. Future planning can also, I mean, it can also go to, funeral and other, but I think the focus should be on the children.
Or it should, but couldn't it be advanced planning in its broadest sense for the recommendation? Because, the grandparents and kinship caregivers themselves should be able to have access to planning their own, putting together their own advanced plans, but as well as future planning for the ones that are in their care, which could then become separate specific actions.
This is bad, and that's really important that that's a consideration, because the way it stands now, just for an example, if a grandparent takes custody through probate court of a child, if that caregiver, grandparent, dies or is incapacitated, the child could actually go back to the parent without a whole lot of careful planning and or placed in the custody of the state.
Yeah, so that would actually go to the children's needs, but we could broaden it to address both the children's and the caregivers' needs by just taking out so that they may provide for children. And so if it says ensure that kinship families and grandfamilies have the resources they need to engage in advanced planning in the event of illness or capacity, that may help so that it addresses all.
Yes, I think it should address both, because it's not just the financial after death. I agree. It is also identifying who's going to take over the care of that child in the event of it.
Yes.
And also securing that it is the caretaker grandparent choice as opposed to someone else.
Yeah, so that I think goes beyond the financial piece, which is this piece is focused on finances, and it may be something we want to somehow flag up for the legal section. I mean, I think it's a super important point, but it may be something we want to put up in legal, which I think is doable.
Ensure that kinship families and grandfamilies have the resources they need to engage in advanced planning in the event of illness or incapacity.
For it, provide for, sorry, they're not planning in the event of illness or capacity, they're planning for that. So I don't know, but maybe we can wordsmith that a little bit later.
So, but the overall, because it's like now 3:32, have we got a gist here? Or we covered the waterfront with recommendations?
I mean, I think what we can do is in the interest of time, and we still want to touch on priority area 5, is we could take these, how we've redrafted these, the rough drafts from this conversation, and send it back to the council members afterwards for their one final pass, and we'll get email consensus.
I think we'll have to do that.
Okay.
Good idea.
All right, let's go on to let's go on to priority area 5.
And this is, you know, it says evidence supported practices in the priority area, but you'll note in the recommendations, well, here we have the kinship navigator. I know Patrick got bumped off, but he may be back on. Establish a national approach for obtaining, analyzing, and disseminating relevant data on kinship families and grand families, because we know there's not enough of that. Increase support and sustain research and development, including adequate investments or evaluation. This is pretty specific of kinship navigator programs, but you know, study and quantify the the value investment of kinship navigator programs support kinship families and grand families, which could then lead to action steps of how to remediate if there are issues. Increase the promotion, translation, and dissemination of promising practices, model approaches, and as we know, that evidence-based practices, which there are not a lot of, but they're all in there to support kinship families and grand families.
I thought I remembered that we were going to take out evidence-based and put something other than that term in there. Is that wrong?
Well, we have model approaches, promising practices. They're actually out of order, but it's sort of an incremental thing. Model approaches is sort of like a few people have done it, and it's a model for that more people should try out. Promising practices have been replicated in more places, and evidence-based would be somebody took like a promising practice and really studied how effective it was, and then and said there's evidence to support that, like, everybody should be doing this.
So is that something that will be defined in some other area?
I would think in the rationale we'd have to
yeah, we would have to have some discussion of what that means and the nuance between evidence, you know, the model approaches and evidence-based. We could certainly do that because it is a very nuanced discussion.
And it's not really a plain language. Also, Liliana suggests promising practices, model approaches, evidence-informed, and evidence-based. So we're kind of covering the gamut of programs and services, whereas others may limit to evidence-based. We're sort of, you know, we know of some programs that have been effective. They're model approaches, but they have potential to be replicated more, but there's no science behind them. Thank you, Gail. And then promising practice, the next step. Evidence-informed means they took some study and took pieces of it to create a program. And then evidence-based would mean there was some scientific data about the effectiveness of the study. What do you guys think? Sorry, Sonia, unmute. Okay.
I think it's fine.
Liliana's edition.
Sorry?
Yeah. Oh, it
like
looks good. It looks good.
Liliana's addition. Thank you, Liliana.
In recommendation 5.1, I would prefer that instead of for a variety of purposes, we give a little bit more, compelling rationale. My mind goes back to earlier language about the social determinants of health and well-being, but anything along those lines that provides really the underlying reason for gathering this information.
Or could we actually end the sentence at kinship
I was going to say, yeah,
End
just
it at
end
the
it
grand
there.
families. I
Yeah,
agree.
just
That's
end
what
it
I
there.
would
relevant data.
Yep.
We can decide in the subtext what the variety of purposes are, the social determinants of health, but we can cluster those in below. Does that seem okay then? I know we've already kept you late, but as always, we have great discussions.
Okay, any other last thoughts? I know we've kept you longer, and we certainly appreciate your willingness to bear with this, but we made a huge amount of progress today.
I'm sorry, but I just one more thing I'm talking about, 5.2, increase support and sustain research for development, including adequate investment in for evaluation of kinship navigator programs. I guess I'm just not quite grasping the whole concept of that statement. And we should be investing and working on making sure that peer supports are included. I guess I'm not real comfortable with that whole paragraph.
So maybe taking out specific reference to kinship navigator and just keep it evaluation of programs that support kinship families and grand families, and then underneath that we could say do an evaluation of kinship navigators, something else and something else.
Okay, good catch, Gail, because we keep talking about high level and then we got specific, and it does kind of make you feel like, is that all we're going to talk about?
I would include peer support.
Kinship navigator and peer support programs.
Yeah. Are there any other broad, are we generally in agreement after the changes that we've made to a couple of these in priority area 5? Are we good with the totality of the 3?
Are we nodding? Are we thumbs upping?
Yes.
Okay.
I think so.
All right.
Oh, Gail, thank you for pointing out that it isn't just the navigator programs, because we have been hearing from a lot of caregivers that the navigator programs are not really there for them. They're being turned away and they're not getting good information. So we do need to know that there's other places that provide better information.
Or that you're using quality navigator programs that have been evaluated.
And kinship navigator programs have a tendency to be under child welfare. So there are kinship navigator programs that support those that are uncertified kin. So yes, that kinship navigator program can be pretty broad if you let them be.
Right, you're right, Gail, and that is exactly what's happening. Is that their main focus is those coming through the formal system, and here again, those outside the formal system are still searching and trying to get answers.
And that varies widely by state. So
oh,
yeah,
yeah.
Acknowledge that. Yeah.
So those are the things we need to talk about down in the body, and then well, we're gonna wrap up. Greg. So our next steps, really wrap up, and next steps is we're going to take the things that we've pulled here today, clean it up, and
Yeah, so I think the plan is going to be that we will clean up all of these recommendations. We'll add in the new ones that we came up with in a couple of spots, and we'll do a doodle poll to the members, just to ask yes or no, or are you in agreement with how these are all worded after we do that. That'll be follow-up number 1. Then we've got 2 next steps that Lori and I are figuring out how we're going to do this. One of them is we keep talking about these rationales or the background pieces for each of the priority areas and for the each of the recommendations. We need to have some narrative that explains what they are. Well, Lori and I are thinking that we would like to call for an ad hoc committee of volunteers from across the council that may want to come together as a group and work on drafting some of that language. We would give you a template for how to do it, for what things we feel you need to hit in each of those recommendations. That could be the potential first next step. The second one is when we had alluded to in Wilma's presentation, the gathering of those programs and materials and things like that. We also need a group to go through and look at those and start making some suggestions for which ones get included specifically in the report, which ones we may hold out for later inclusion in a broader database of model programs and things like that. Thoughts on the idea of convening you all as groups of ad hoc committees for maybe the months of October and November, where you work specifically on those dedicated tasks?
Sort of like work groups.
Yeah, work groups.
I would appreciate that, because I think that we get too many people in a group and we aren't getting our ideas. So if we had smaller groups to work on specific things, I think it would be very helpful.
Okay, so we're thinking, great. So we're thinking 2 groups, one to work on crafting some language for each of the recommendations, and then another group to start sorting through the list of all of the programs and things that we collected. And we'll do another doodle poll or something to allow yourselves to assign yourselves to those committees, and then we'll send out some information for how you're going to work on that.
I'd also like to interject that, with the timing and everything, not everyone may have availability, and that's okay too.
Yeah, we recognize that we're coming up to a busy time on top of crazy times. So anything else? Does anyone have any other thoughts or ideas before we adjourn for the day?
I just want to say thank you to everyone.
Yeah, so huge thank you. You all are amazing. The amount of information that we can get through to discuss and to really begin to make some decisions. This is really kind of exciting. So thank you all. And Lori and I will be in touch with some next steps and some emails. So please keep a lookout for emails from us.
Doodle polls to come.
That's right. Okay, take care, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.